I have the honor of introducing Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. She represents the 1st Congressional District of Oregon, which includes Washington, Yamhill, Clatsop, and Columbia counties, as well as part of Multnomah County. Congresswoman Bonamici grew up as the daughter of a small business owner. Her first job was in her mother's retail store. She first attended Lane Community College and then the University of Oregon, where she earned her bachelor's and law degrees. Before representing small business in Portland, she worked for the Federal Trade Commission. In Congress, she is passionate about long-term investments in transportation and infrastructure, childcare, housing, and education, just to name a few of the many issues she fights for on behalf of all Oregonians. Congresswoman Bonamici is focused on making college more affordable and providing workers with in-demand skills to enter the workforce. She is the founder and co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional STEM Caucus, which encourages innovation and creative thinking by integrating arts and design with science, technology, engineering, and math education. In Congress, she is a leader on the Education and Labor Committee, chair of the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Human Services. She also serves on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, is a senior member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, and a leader on the Subcommittee on the Environment and Subcommittee on Energy. Congresswoman, we are honored and thankful to have you with us today. We have more than 70 business and public members in attendance. I know I speak for everyone when I say thank you for your tireless commitment to the 1st Congressional District and to all Oregonians. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Happy Constitution Day. I always appreciate the chance to connect with the Westside Economic Alliance. I miss being together with you at the Embassy Suites, of course. For now, this virtual forum gives us a way to connect and stay safe. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to Gail in her new position. I enjoyed our chat earlier this week and look forward to working with you and your membership. So I'm going to cover 3 sort of main topics to start, but I want to allow a lot of time for questions. So there's 3 topics: the pandemic and economy, the Build Back Better plan, which we're working on currently in Congress, and a preview of the work that we're planning to do in the next upcoming several weeks. And then I look forward to taking your questions. So we know over the last year and a half, gosh, it feels like a long time, but we've had these unprecedented challenges with a pandemic. And I truly appreciate your resilience and creativity as business leaders to navigate these challenging times. And throughout, I've spoken with many business owners about how you're adjusting. I talked to a grocery store in McMinnville. They were first adjusting their hours because of a workforce shortage. A woman-owned food manufacturer, they considered closing because they didn't have childcare. A Latino restaurant owner in Hillsborough, getting by with help from the federal relief programs, the EIDL program, EIDL, and the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. We helped a mother and daughter who own a gym in Portland. We helped them access a grant. They were able to set up a new business model and stay open virtually. So as you heard in that kind introduction, my first job a few years ago in my mom's small business, I really learned firsthand the joys and challenges of running a small business. And I keep that in mind when I speak to business owners, that their commitment is something to be applauded. So these federal business relief programs have really helped many. And they also show that we have work to do still to address longstanding disparities, many of which existed before, but were highlighted during the pandemic. Also create more transparency at the Small Business Administration. And although it's not a perfect program, the Paycheck Protection Program, as of May, had invested about $800 billion in about 12 million businesses. Those are the SBA statistics. Then the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL loans, have supplied more than $200 billion in funding to almost 4 million businesses. And importantly, the $29 billion restaurant revitalization fund has really helped. We know there's still need out there, but we've heard from many business owners who said they wouldn't be open today without this funding. So we all thought that we'd be in a very different place by now. I know if you had told me a year ago we'd be where we are right now, I wouldn't have believed it. But the troubling Delta variant has set us back. And I think the sponsors, all of them, but particularly those in healthcare, we know how incredibly challenging it's been for them and for all the healthcare providers. So we're fortunate because we have safe, effective, free vaccines. So if you're on the fence or you know someone on the fence, please, I urge everyone, talk with a healthcare provider. If there's people you know who are hesitant, please have them talk to a healthcare provider. This is our way out of the pandemic. It's through vaccination. And we're really truly seeing what's happening now with the hospitals being full with primarily and sometimes exclusively people who are not vaccinated. I'm going to move on to the Build Back Better plan, which the House and Senate are working on now. This is what we're looking at, very important in terms of timing because of the building back from the pandemic, but not just building back to the way things were before, but in a more sustainable, equitable way. Really, excuse me, once in a generation investment and the foundation of middle-class prosperity, education, healthcare, paid family leave and sick leave and childcare. Now, these are policies that are designed to create more opportunities for people to thrive and have a better future. And the way I look at it is we all do better when we all do better. And childcare is one of those issues that kept coming up when I talked to business owners and families throughout the pandemic. Now, I'm a mom, and even though my kids are grown, I know how essential childcare is for our workforce. Earlier this year, I helped secure a robust investment in childcare, $39 billion in the American Rescue Plan, but our Build Back Better plan expands that foundation. And we'll be providing low and middle income families with direct support to help cover childcare costs. When it's phased in, no family will pay more than 7% of their income for childcare. And the sliding scale really makes it an equitable system. And we're going to make free preschool available to children who are 3 and 4 years old. And we've seen, Multnomah County ramping up their free universal preschool, as well as Washington County starting that work now. What a good investment to make sure our kids get a good start in life and leveling the playing field for those who right now cannot afford preschool. So I recently heard, I talked to people around the district. I heard from a couple of moms, Megan and Marshall. They were really struggling to afford reliable childcare while working full time, and listening to their stories, you could sense their frustration. So that is a key issue that we're focused on, is making sure that childcare system is there so people can get back to work and know their kids are safe. Higher education, you heard in that kind introduction, I started at Lane Community College, and I truly appreciate and understand that access to community college can open doors and help students succeed. And Oregon is a leader here. Our tuition-free community college program is one of the models for the country. Our Build Back Better plan would invest resources to make sure people across the country in participating states can access tuition-free community college. But we also will lower overall college costs by increasing the maximum Pell Grant award. And again, I want to emphasize what a good investment it is when people can get into college. Finances should not be a barrier. And then when they graduate, they're going to have more opportunities for success and contribute more to the economy. Now, we know that the industry needs more qualified employees. And whether it be through community college or a college degree, we know we have future workforce needs. But we also recognize that not everyone's on the same path, and alternatives to the traditional college path need to be available. This is where the workforce piece comes in. Too many workers are facing severe economic consequences of the pandemic. It's not the same for everyone. Women have been pushed out of the workforce disproportionately. So we're leading the way on workforce development. And this is something that I have really made a focus and have taken a leadership position on. I've been advocating with my colleagues, with the administration, with the labor secretary. And so we have included in, the Education and Labor Committee's Build Back Better legislation, robust investment in workforce programs. We also have passed the National Apprenticeship Act through the Education and Labor Committee. Really excited to see this first update to the apprenticeship legislation, the federal bill, since the 1930s. Would create nearly 1 million registered apprenticeships over the next 5 years. It includes my Bipartisan Partners Act to help small and medium-sized businesses establish apprenticeships and give workers the support they need as they're getting through that job training opportunity. And in the legislation, we're expanding youth and adult job training, as well as those apprenticeship programs, and also increasing the support services to help prepare workers for the jobs of the future. I recently got to visit PCC's world-class training center up in Scappoose at the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center's campus. So what a great local example of the power of partnerships and workforce development to change lives and really contribute to regional growth. So two more historic parts of this legislation. To build back better, we're phasing in an expansion of Medicare to cover dental, vision, and hearing, which is really key. Teeth, eyes, and ears are all part of the body. And again, a good investment, because without that coverage, oftentimes people on Medicare delay getting care when they need it, and that ends up in exacerbated health conditions. So, and then finally, with Build Back Better, but importantly, we're going to be addressing the climate crisis, funding to help us meet clean energy goals, reduce emissions, invest in electric vehicle infrastructure, and more. So key, as we're seeing an increase in the severity and frequency of severe weather events. We are committed to taking this bold climate action. So September preview. Oftentimes I've said, I wish I had a working crystal ball, but here's what we're planning. Going back to Washington, D.C. on Monday, our to-do list is long, but I'm eager to get it done. We're working on, as I mentioned, the Build Back Better Act. Each committee has a section. We're all sending it back to the Budget Committee and then to the floor. The committees have been working hard on that. Hopeful that we'll be sending it to the Senate, and also passing a traditional infrastructure bill to address roads, bridges, rail, transit, broadband, and more. And I say traditional because even though it's not like the narrow roads and bridges bills of the past, we also need to include broadband and transit. But we also need to invest in the human infrastructure, and that's what I mentioned with the Build Back Better. Now, we also have to fulfill our nation's financial obligations and address the debt ceiling. Other priority legislation includes my bipartisan update of the Community Service Block Grant Program. This is bipartisan legislation I've just introduced to support our community action agencies. And then the appropriations legislation that includes community project funding requests. I advanced like the great Beaverton Nonprofit Incubator. So I value your input today as I work on these important legislative goals and look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'm going to toss out the first question, if I may. And I know housing is a very, very important issue to you. And the lack of affordable housing was at a crisis point for our region prior to the pandemic, and the need has only grown. How is the housing crisis affecting our economic growth, and what can we do to address it?
That's a great question, Gail. And yes, housing was a challenge even before the pandemic. And this is another area where the pandemic has exacerbating existing inequities and challenges. We know that, oftentimes wages for working people have stagnated, or especially during the pandemic, too many people are out of work. And housing costs continue to go up. I recently got one of those flyers that showed the average cost of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home to purchase. It keeps going up, as well as rental costs. No place in this country can a family afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment making minimum wage. So it's been devastating for so many people in our community. Families have been displaced, neighborhoods are disrupted, and when you think about children out of a home and still needing to learn. So it must be addressed at the local, state, and federal levels. There are several pieces of legislation that I'm supporting to help with more affordable housing, more support services. I recently had a conversation with a nonprofit organization that helps transition people from being homeless to temporary shelter, but also stays with them and gives them the support services to get them into long-term housing. That's what we really need, is that support. So we need more low-income housing, and we need more opportunities for people to be able to afford it through, for example, Section 8 vouchers. People have told me they've been on a wait list for years to get into Section 8 housing. So it's the affordability, the number of and lack of access to truly affordable housing, which we need more of, and we can address through things like the low-income tax credit, low-income housing tax credit, but also having those wraparound support services. And I want to mention too, Gail, that in the legislation that I mentioned, there's really the Build Back Better legislation is really designed to give more people opportunities to be successful, to be able to get good jobs, once we get kids with a good start in school, and know that they'll have more opportunities to get a good paying job, to start a business, to run a business. It's a long-term solution, but we need both short-term solutions and long-term solutions.
Thank you. And I see we have a question in the Q&A, and I would invite attendees to please pop questions in, and I can facilitate from there. This question is from John Cook. I know you can't get involved in redistricting, but please comment on how District 1 would include North Portland and part of Northeast Portland, but you would lose Tiger, Tualatin, Sherwood, King City, and most of Beaverton from that district.
Thank you for the question, John. Obviously, we're watching the legislative redistricting process. Some of you know I 10 years ago chaired the Senate Redistricting Committee when I was in the legislature, and we have legislative redistricting, and it is up to the legislature to draft a plan that does comply with Oregon law and the Constitution. So, of course, we're watching that. I know there have been several different plans proposed. District 1, actually every district in the state is going to change because, number one, our population has grown significantly. District 1 is larger in population than any of the other districts. And then with getting another seat in the legislature, that means that every district is going to change significantly. So I'm going to be the district I'm honored to represent is going to have to reduce the population by more than 150,000 people. So it's up to the legislature to determine where those people come from and what the district looks like. And of course, we're watching the process very carefully. And I will do my best to represent whichever population ends up in the district I'm honored to represent. So thank you for your question, John. But we're just watching it very closely.
So as we wait for questions to come in, I do have another question for you. You mentioned the Education and Labor Committee just passed its portion of the Build Back Better plan. Can you tell us about the higher education components of that plan and how they would support economic growth? And I know you mentioned PCC and other examples, but if you could expand upon that.
Sure. The education provisions, you said specifically the higher education provisions, correct?
Well, or elementary, secondary, I think is equally as valid.
Yes. Well, we start with, I'll start at the very beginning. We start with childcare and universal pre-K, but then in the K-12 system, we do a couple of things. Number one, the school nutrition programs, expanding the opportunity for community eligibility, which our school districts really appreciate. Community eligibility just means that it's easier to give more students lunch without burdensome paperwork. So we're expanding that. And then the summer EBT, or electronic benefits program, oftentimes summer is a huge gap where kids are not getting nutritious food during the summer. So we're expanding that summer program. And then also there's an infrastructure component to help repair, restore, remodel crumbling schools. Now, in many areas, especially in Washington County, we have great new school buildings. I was just able to go to there's a grand opening of Beaverton's Arts and Communication Magnet Academy. I mean, we have some great school buildings, but there's again here an equity gap in the districts where they don't have bond measures passed and they just can't restore those buildings and replace them. So there's infrastructure money there. So in the K-12 system, and then in the higher education system, I'll mention too, the tuition-free community college, which, Oregon already has a start there, and this will be a partner and supportive of that legislation. But we're also increasing the Pell Grant, which is really critical. When I went to college, my family wasn't in a position to help me. And so I had a combination of grants, loans, and work study. And it was very manageable. So that's not the story I'm hearing from too many families today. So increasing Pell Grants is important. I've been for years working on a reform of the work study system. I think it's important, really important program that can also help align students' career goals with their work study jobs. So there's lots of potential there. That piece is not in Build Back Better, but it's something that I continue to work on. So there's a lot in Build Back Better. And in addition, the workforce piece. They're in the workforce funding. There are community college industry partnerships, for example, that support our community colleges partnering with local industries to make sure that their programs are really preparing people to do the jobs in their local community. So lots of great provisions in there to help level the playing field and make higher education accessible and affordable for all.
Thank you. And we have our next question from Sheila Greenlaw Fink. Thank you for highlighting the growing issues around housing affordability. You have likely heard from many of the seniors in Tigard whose homes subsidized through the low-income housing tax credit program will most likely be lost due to the sale to private investors from the San Francisco Bay Area. Will the low-income housing tax credit fixes you support help address this issue? Meaning sale to speculative investors.
We sure hope so. And thank you for that question. And I have had conversations about this issue, and I'm going to ask my staff to get an update on where things stand. But the legislation that we're working on right now has a significant investments in preserving public housing. I can't say right now how they would apply to that specific situation, but there are investments. There's $10 billion for the Public Housing Capital Fund for modernization and development of more public housing, more housing choice vouchers. There's rental assistance. There's also an Ending Homelessness Act that I'm supporting. So there are a lot of pieces of legislation on the federal level that will help. I'll take a look at whether these provisions can help in that particular situation. And I thank you again for bringing that to my attention. There's also, I want to mention, in the Build Back Better legislation, new investment fund under CDFI, which is great. So there's a program to leverage private investments to develop more housing opportunities with priority to low-income families. So just a lot of community development block grants and more. So there's a lot of provisions to address housing and affordable housing. Thank you, Sheila.
So thank you. Your life as a member of Congress is likely different as administrations change over. Can you tell us how it's different working with the Biden administration, and what goals does Congress and the White House have over the next 3 years?
Thank you. And it has been different. I served for many years, 6 or 7 years, in the minority party. And even though we had President Obama, I was still in the minority in the House for several years. And I always approached my job with the understanding that my constituents didn't send me to Congress to only get things done when I'm in the majority. So I've always reached out to find bipartisan partners. I mentioned my community service block grant program. I had a large part when I was in the minority and in passing the Every Student Succeeds Act, the rewrite of No Child Left Behind, and the Older Americans Act, which I continue to work on. The first version was passed in 2016, and the second version was passed in 2019. So under different administrations. So we try to find common ground and to have those bipartisan successes. I do want to note that it's become a bit more challenging after January 6th. Which was incredibly traumatic, as you can imagine, for those of us who were there at the Capitol. Even though there's a significant, and I'll admit, there's a significant amount of PTSD among many members who were actually on the floor. I was not on the floor, I was in my office. It still makes it harder to find those partnerships. But to me, that is my job to get things done. I'm going to share the grief and the concern about that day. And there's a protest planned for tomorrow in DC, and hoping the best for everyone's safety. Congress is not in session, but to continue to work together and to get things done. So in the Biden administration, this is actually my first time serving in the majority with a Democratic president. And we've had great opportunities to work with, particularly the cabinet members, which has been wonderful. We didn't have that opportunity too much in the Trump administration. They would rarely send their cabinet secretaries to hearings. For example, I think Secretary DeVos was only in the Education Committee twice in 4 years. And I've already had Secretary Cardona not only in the committee, but here visiting in Oregon, where I had the honor and pleasure of showing him a wonderful bilingual summer program in Hillsborough and having a roundtable conversation with our community college presidents and students. So there's just more opportunities like that. And for example, I'm on the science committee, and we have jurisdiction over NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. They play a huge role in the Weather Service and in coastal monitoring. And the NOAA administrator now, who was recently confirmed, is Dr. Rick Spinrad from Oregon State University. And so we have a great opportunity to work with Dr. Spinrad. And during the Trump administration, there wasn't a confirmed NOAA administrator throughout the entire administration. So there's just a lot more opportunities to work with cabinet officials, to have them understand Oregon needs and the needs of our country. So I'm honored to have been over to a bill signing, for example, with President Biden. I was never invited to one in the Trump administration, but President Biden signed a bill I worked on to address discrimination on the job. So it's been an honor, and I just want to note that the cabinet, for example, the Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, is a former colleague of mine and a brilliant woman, and the first Native American to hold a cabinet position in Interior. So it's just I'm encouraged and inspired by the people who are serving in the administration and their willingness to address the challenges ahead of us. Also, the HHS Secretary Becerra, is a former colleague as well.
Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting myself. We do have a question from Commissioner Pantries, also my predecessor, and you touched on this in your previous answer, but she's asking, will you please comment on the safety of the Capitol with the prospect of the protest scheduled for this weekend?
Yes, we've been assured that first of all, the fence is back up, which is sad for the U.S. Capitol to be, again, surrounded by a fence. But again, we are not in session this weekend, not going till Monday. And we have been assured that the Capitol Police is ready for whatever may come their way. I have such respect for our hardworking Capitol Police and the DC Metro Police. The National Guard is on standby. So we are hoping for the best. It is also my understanding that Leader McCarthy, the Republican leader, has said no members of Congress are planning to attend. So that's a bit reassuring. Although I do want to note that I just read yesterday that Congressman Anthony Gonzalez from Ohio, Republican, who's just been in a couple of terms, but as a great member of the Science Committee, and enjoyed working with him, even though he played football for Ohio State. And I'm going to try not to gloat when I see him, because he thought they were going to win over the weekend. Go Ducks. But he announced yesterday he's not running for re-election. He's one of the 10 Republicans who voted for impeachment after January 6th. It truly shook him to his core. And he said that he has a wife and small children, and the threats that he's received, it's just not worth it to him. And that's just really sad that we're losing a great member of Congress because he just doesn't want that lifestyle or that concern to live a life with small children and police escorting them places. So I long for the day when we could have respectful disagreements about policy without people being threatened. I just read a story about an Oregon official being threatened by someone who didn't believe in vaccinations. and like truly threatened, and we have to get away from that and have a, 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 a country and a state and a community where we can have disagreements, and we may have different ideas about how to solve problems, or even different ideas about what the problems are we need to solve. But let's have respectful disagreements and listen to each other and come up with solutions. So that's my concern, Commissioner Treese, that I think I'm convinced that they're prepared for this weekend. But in the long term, I'm concerned about what has happened with the public discourse. So I think we all have to do our part to resolve that, but it's a long-term challenge, to be sure.
We have another question from Garrett Rosenthal. Do you have any comments on either Senator Wyden's new tax proposal, multi-year high income, or Senator Merkley's free from plastic initiative and their potential impacts on business?
Thank you, Garrett. Nice to see you, albeit virtually. Thank you for your question. I haven't reviewed the details of Senator Wyden's tax proposal. We're just looking at the House proposal that's coming out of Ways and Means. I think they just finished 2 days ago in understanding that. But I do know that what I support is a progressive tax structure, not progressive like liberal, but progressive, not regressive tax structure that makes sure that individuals and businesses are paying their fair share, but that recognizes that there are still a lot of people struggling and that small businesses are not the same as large businesses. And then with regard to the plastics bill, I understand, I co-chair the Oceans Caucus and have been working with my Republican Oceans Caucus co-chair, Congressman Don Young from Alaska, who obviously has a lot of ocean. He represents the whole state of Alaska. And this is an issue and a concern that we've been working on for quite some time. Save Our Seas. We've done a couple versions of that to clean up marine debris, but particularly the plastics. So I understand that there are industry concerns. However, this is a great place where we can use some research and development and alternatives, safe alternatives to plastics, because as we know, plastics do not biodegrade and they can remain in our environment for decades, if not millennia. So it is a concern about the health of our ocean, because the health of the ocean reflects the health of the planet. So we're working on those issues, and I'll take a look at the specifics of Senator Merkley's bill, but Representative Lowenthal in the House has a similar version, which I'm supporting. Thanks for your questions.
Congresswoman, you mentioned the visit with Secretary Cardona, and I think around the same time we actually had we had Secretary Cardona, Buttigieg, Secretary Vilsack, Secretary Walsh, and my understanding is that that's a new, really kind of innovative aspect of kind of House procedure and process, where there are now district work periods, which we commonly refer to as recess, obviously, but there are also these additional committee district work periods. And my suspicion is that those visits are a function of that committee district work period. Having done that work for 25 years, it's so refreshing to see a new innovative approach. Can you comment on what you hope to see going forward and other innovative approaches?
Well, the in-district committee work periods have changed. That is a function of the pandemic, because before the pandemic, when we were in committees, we were sitting in committee rooms in Washington, D.C. And a lot of committees still do meet, several committees do that in the Capitol, and you sit in the committee room. Unfortunately, not all of my colleagues are vaccinated, and some of them refuse to wear masks. So the virtual option is available for many committees. But throughout the pandemic, we have the committee hearings online, and then also we have markups, which is like a work session online. And then we've allowed, also the House has allowed, because of the pandemic, for proxy voting. Now, that doesn't mean we give our vote to somebody else to figure out what to do. During the height of the pandemic, people voting by proxy would do a specific email for each and every vote, and it has to come from the official account, has to be verified for how would you vote on each particular bill. And then the person who's in DC simply reads that vote into the record and fills out a card and has it recorded into the record. So it was just a way to keep people safe, but it's given us an opportunity to have more time in the district. And with the visits from the cabinet secretaries, I think that's a function of the leadership roles of people in our state, particularly like with Secretary Buttigieg, Peter DeFazio, Congressman DeFazio, he's the chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And so with that being such a priority for our state and our country, it's not a surprise that Secretary Buttigieg came here to Oregon. Secretary Vilsack, Secretary Walsh, they've been, I think, very engaged with members of the House, which is very refreshing. So I'm grateful for that. It gives us an opportunity to really work directly with the administration and share our priorities and really have the attention and the opportunity to bring, Oregon's strengths and challenges to the administration directly and have them take that back to the president and the rest of the cabinet. So we're very excited about that.
I think those are all the questions in the Q&A and the chat, but I would very much like to thank you for your time and look forward to working with you now and in the future. And it's very exciting time, unprecedented time, but exciting to see, the silver linings that are coming out of all of this. And I think you just really highlighted those. I'm not sure we would have ever done that had we not been in the situation we are. So, certainly nobody wanted this, but trying to take the good as what's come out of this unprecedented time and tough situation that we're in. So I would like to thank everybody for attending and for your time this morning. Certainly, again, recognizing our forum presenting sponsor, Kaiser Permanente, and our forum series sponsor, Legacy Health. Congresswoman, I would ask you if you have any final thoughts. Certainly, we would welcome those, and from there we will wrap up.
Well, thank you so much, Gail, and welcome to the Westside Economic Alliance. Very much look forward to working with you and continuing to work with your great membership. And I just say to everyone, please take care, stay safe, and stay tuned. We have some big challenges ahead, but also some wonderful opportunities to not just build back, but to build back better. That is not an original slogan that came from the administration, but in a way that really provides more opportunity and equity. And as I said early on, we all do better when we all do better. And so solving some of these challenges and making sure that our kids get a great start in life and people have the path to get the skills for a good job, and we're rebuilding our infrastructure in a sustainable way. Those things are going to have not only short-term consequences, but long-term consequences and lead to a better future. So thanks, everybody. Again, stay safe.
Thank you so much.